go. And this last one, there we go. It's not working. It's not working. Well, it looks like there's a conflicting constraint there that I wasn't aware of. So even that sometimes throws an error. So let me go to my formula.
How do you do the auto update? Create an auto update?
I just went up to Tools and went to Options, and I changed under Assembly Design Update to be automatic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So it looks like I've got a constraint in one of my sketches here that it doesn't like on this particular part. So I apologize. I thought I had all the kinks worked out, but apparently even I'm not a complete genius about this stuff. Let's go ahead and change this down to like 50 and see if that should solve it. That might be, there you go. Okay, so I changed the parameter to 50, and that was my length, and so the length that I set up controls the length in this long direction, and apparently when it goes beyond a certain length it breaks in my file, so there's probably something I didn't take into consideration. But when you do set up an assembly like this correctly, you can change one of the parameters and it will move the parts that specific length and keep all of the connections. So if we go up to Tools and go to Formula and go to Height and maybe make this a little bit bigger, like 35. Let's see if this should work. Yeah. So the height just increased on my part, and now this thing has kind of expanded, keeping all of the relative parameters. They're, you know, a consistent ratio, and so I'm able to move this thing up. You'll notice here that my pin isn't quite constrained correctly, and so technically that pin should be located inside this little segment here, and then my control arm is constrained to be on top of that little pin, so it looks like the pin's just not updating. But I can do that. I can also come up here and go back up to Tools and go to Formula, and I can change the width of this thing. Maybe I want to do 30, make it wider. See if it'll do it. Yep. So it's a little bit wider. And so as you're able to make these changes inside top down, there might be a part that you realize is created incorrectly. You could go in and change it. And if this thing is set up appropriately, it should automatically update all of the parts that are associated with that constraint. So that's why top-down is really cool. It allows you to make those changes without having to reconstrain all of the parts. Its disadvantage is it sometimes does take time to set up a top-down assembly, but it pays off in the end because you don't have to worry about changing all the individual parts one at a time. So I'm going to show you guys how to go about creating a top-down assembly, and then I'll give you guys time to kind of play around with that, ask questions, and then for the in-class exercise, you guys will download this, and I will have you guys remove some of the parts out of there, and then you'll need to recreate those parts linking the appropriate geometry. So I'll show you kind of the basics first. So I'm going to close out of this entire thing. I don't want to save my changes. We're going to start a new product. So a product is used for assemblies. A part is just used for individual modeling. So we're going to create a new product. And you can go ahead and save this somewhere if you'd like to, just as like a test. So I'll come in here to my J drive and MB471 Catia, and I'll create a test folder. And we'll just call this test 1 for me. Okay. The very, very first thing, and this is really important for Catia, in order to make sure that the top-down assembly works, there is an option that you need to turn on at the very beginning of your project. Otherwise, any links that you create to control this morphing capability will break. So to turn that option on, go up to Tools, Options, and then inside of the part tree, you'll go to Infrastructure, and you'll come down here to Part Infrastructure. And then underneath the General tab, there is a Keep Link with Selected Object. That has to be turned on for top-down assembly. Anything that you create while this link is turned off will break the links that allow that morphing capability. Okay, so that has to be turned on. So when you guys are meeting with your groups and discussing sub-assemblies, if you decide to create a master part for your master assembly, first thing I would do is just make sure that's turned on. Okay? So once that's turned on, we're good to go. First thing we want to do is we want to create a skeleton. A skeleton is just a wireframe using basic geometry to represent the relationships of your parts. Okay? So we talked when I gave lecture about top-down. I know I kind of cruised through it really quickly, but there's two things that you want to do when you're creating a top-down. The first one is you want to identify key system level relationships, and the second one is you want to identify key system parameters. Okay? So we'll start with the relationships first. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a skeleton inside of our part. And if I remember correctly, we add a new part to our product. So you'll click on part, you'll click on the product, and it will place a part inside of your product. Okay? And so inside this part, I can just double click here in part and it'll take me into part mode. We are going to create a skeleton. Okay? For the skeleton, we're going to be using these key level relationships. So if I'm kind of unsure about what it is I need to include in my skeleton, the first thing I'm going to do is think to myself, all right, I'm going to develop a remote control race car. I need to have some way of identifying how long this car is, how wide it is, how high it is. I need some way of identifying where the sub-assemblies are going to connect. Okay? So maybe the first thing that I would do is create a sketch on this plane here, and I'll draw a line. Okay. And I'll say that line represents how long my car is going to be. Okay? So maybe that's the first relationship.
So you just put in a line there. You just drew a line.
Yeah, I just drew a line. Is there a question from NTU?
Which plane did you put it on? I mean, not the.
I just put it on the XY plane. This plane right here. That one. Okay. So I've got my first relationship. I need a parameter for that. So to create a parameter, I'm going to go up to Tools, Formula. Real quick, you need to make sure that if you're in the master assembly or the master skeleton, you need to make sure that your parameters you create are in the appropriate level. So right now we're in the top level. You can kind of think of it this way if I do a little diagram for you. You kind of think of it this way. In top down, you guys need the join me number. Mind if I restart? Okay. So when you do bottom up assembly, you kind of start creating parts, right? So these are representative of part files. You'll kind of constrain them from bottom up assembly. So you'll bring in parts one at a time into a product, kind of to tell it where the constraints are. So you'll create like a sub-assembly, and then you'll have like a master assembly file. So this is the first thing you do in bottom up. This is the second, and that's the third. Okay. In top down, we are creating the master assembly first. This is where the skeleton will exist. Okay? Once we create all this stuff, we're going to start adding sub-assemblies. And you can even add parts if you want to inside of the master. There's nothing that says you can't. And then you're going to go ahead and create parts for those. Maybe you can even do more sub-assemblies if you want to. Depends on how you guys organize this. There's nothing that says you have to do it just all sub-assemblies on one layer and then parts on the next layer. So we're kind of going to be in this area first. And so since we're creating our skeleton, all of the parameters that we're going to create for the skeleton have to be in the skeleton, the top of this tree, okay? So when we're creating our parameters, we want to make sure we're double clicked on the product.
Okay, so on product one, I was just going to ask you, there's that little thing in the top left of the screen that won't let us see like what part of the tree you have activated.
How's that?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Actually, hang on, I think I know how to turn that off. Let's see if I can get rid of it.
If you press the right button, everything will explode.
Let's see here. I'm not sure how to get rid of that. Yeah, I'm not sure how to get rid of that, so I'll just kind of drag my window over so you can kind of see what I'm doing with the part tree.
You can have it up higher so you can see the bottom.
All right, let's just do it that way. I mean, that'll work just fine. Okay, so if I double click on the product, I am now in the skeleton level, and so I want to make sure that the skeleton parameters I create are inside the product. So I'll go to Tools, Formula, and I will do a new parameter of type length. Okay, and we're going to make it a single value.
Oh my gosh, this is
okay. So if I press new parameter of type length, it'll pop up this little dialog here, and I can name it whatever I want. I'm just going to call it length.
Did that name come up automatically?
Yeah, length.1 is the default.
Okay, did not do that when I was checking it out.
So you just click on it, say length. I think the average length of a skeleton for like an RC is about 350, 360 millimeters, somewhere in there. So I'll just do like, I'll make a guess and say 350. When you guys are designing your car, you might have no clue what size the parts are. So for the time being, for creating your skeleton, just make some guesses, because it's more important that you set it up rather than be accurate. And then as you're going and modeling, you can change your skeleton to fit the needs of the vehicle. Okay? So I'm just going to guess for right now that it's 350 millimeters. I'll go ahead and press OK. And then if I go back into here, I can grab my constraint tool, constrain the length, and then double click on this, and it'll bring up my constraint definition box. If I right click in that box and go to edit formula, it'll bring up my formula editor, and then I'm going to click on the product, go to rename parameters, and there's length. Okay, so that's how you get access to
Where
it.
did you said you?
So I'll do that again just to show you guys how to get to it.
Oh,
okay. So I did a constraint on my sketch. This hopefully should be something you guys are familiar with if you've done some basic modeling with Catia before. You'll place your constraint on your line. You'll double click on the dimension. Right click in this box, and it will give you the option to edit formula. And if you click on that, it'll bring up the formula editor. And if you just single left click on the product, it'll bring up an external parameter selection. And if I go to the filter type and just go to renamed, it has all of the parameters that I created in my skeleton. So I can select length, and it'll say external parameters length. Okay, this is why it was important to turn that option on when we first started, because I can select that length, and if that option is turned on, it will keep that relationship when I exit and come back into the part. If that option is not turned on, and I save everything and leave, and try to come back in later, everything that I've created has no clue where to go to grab it. So that option has to be turned on in order for you to link the parameters down to the sub-assembly levels. Okay? So I'm just going to say that's equal to my length, press OK again, and there will be a little formula symbol next to my dimension showing that this is now constrained to a parameter.
What happens if we can't, like, I click the rename parameter, but it's not showing my parameter name?
You need to select the product first.
You need to select the product first.